Okay, so now that we've containerized our app, you might be thinking we're ready to deploy it. But think about it for a second. The whole point of this service is that we want to process videos uploaded by users, not our own videos that are just happen to be saved to the same file system in our Docker container. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of these two files and delete them permanently. So no more NeetCode intro for us. And we're going to modify this code and add a bunch more code to actually download files from Google Cloud Storage and then process the videos locally and then upload the processed file to Google Cloud Storage as well. Because the file system of a Docker container is not necessarily persistent. Like if our container dies, we don't save the file and we can't easily serve the files from this file system. That's not what this service is about. So that's why we need like a centralized place to store the videos. And of course, we'll be talking more in depth about Google Cloud Storage in a couple lessons. So let's start by first installing the Google Cloud Storage client library, which you can do like this at Google Cloud/storage. And there we go. And to separate out the code, I'm not going to write all of the storage code here. I'm actually going to write all of that code in a new file, which I'm going to call storage.ts. There's probably a better name for that. But what this file is going to be about is it's going to do all of the Google Cloud Storage, the GCS file interactions. And also it's going to keep track of all the local file interactions as well. So basically this is like our storage layer, and we'll be consuming all of the functions that we write here within our index.ts. First thing I'm going to do is actually import Google Cloud Storage. So we can do that like that. Yeah, Copilot got it. And I'm also going to import file system from just the Node.js native file system. And actually, I'm also going to import FFmpeg here as well. Not sure why it's uppercase this time. They might just be the same, but I've been using lowercase, so I'll stick with that. And before I start actually writing any code, I'm just going to define all of the functions that I'm going to be showing you here in just a second. So there's one function called setup directories. And this is going to create local directories within the Docker container for the raw and processed files. So basically, when we download from Google Cloud Storage, we're going to download those files in the raw folder. When we process them, we're going to put them in the processed folder. This is just a good way to like separate the files. You could probably get away with not doing this, but we're going to do it just to keep things like in an organized way for us. And I'm actually going to put the conversion code here in a separate function as well, so that we don't actually have like this big function call within our index.ts. And if I wanted to, honestly, we could move all of this code into a separate function as well. Just for simplicity, I'm not going to do that, but you're welcome to like split things up into even more files, but I'm just going to stick with 2 files for now. Before I actually go over this, let's define a few constants up above. And the first one actually is going to be just declaring an instance of cloud storage for us to interact with that API. So I'm just copying and pasting the code, but for you, I would encourage you to like manually type it out so that you can kind of learn it better. Creating an instance of GCS, well, the SDK, like the library, and we have a couple hard-coded strings. One is the raw bucket name. And for this, I'm actually going to make it even a bit shorter. I'm going to call this NeetCode YouTube raw videos. So you probably will not be able to use this exact same string because Google Cloud Storage bucket names have to be globally unique. That means if anyone has the same name, you can't use the same one. So you can kind of add whatever prefix here that you want, maybe like a few numbers or something like that. Or maybe even YouTube raw videos hasn't been taken yet. You can be the first one to do that. We're going to have one bucket for the raw videos. This is where people are going to upload their videos to. And after we are done processing them within this service, we're going to upload the processed version to this separate bucket. We're going to download from this bucket and upload to this bucket. Now, we do need local paths as well. Well, we don't need them, but we're going to use them just to kind of stay organized. When we download raw videos, we're going to put them in this folder in our local file system, the raw videos folder. When we process videos, we're going to place them into this folder. After we upload a processed video to the bucket and it's successful, we should probably clean up and delete the raw video and the processed video from our local file system, because depending on how much storage we have, we might run out, or we might just consume a lot of resources. We don't need to pay for all that storage for files that we've already processed. So that's the idea. Now, going back to the convert video, as you can kind of see, and as the comments state, we're going to be given a raw video name, And we assume that this video is going to be stored in the raw video folder. We're going to be given a process name so that after we convert the video, we're going to put it inside this folder with this name. So it's a very simple API that we're going to be consuming within our index.ts, and I'm going to show you how to define it in just a second. Actually, I think I might as well show it to you now. We'll skip the setup directories. We'll come back to that. But for this, I'll just go ahead and show it to you now because it's going to be pretty similar. So we're going to be given ffmpeg. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste the code from the other file just so we have a little bit of starting code. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Of course, we're going to remove the rest of this probably as well. Coming back here, copy and pasting this. Now, what file name do you think we're going to actually use? Probably not this one. We're going to use this one, but also we know that this is stored in a particular directory up here. We're going to use backtick so that we can have a couple of variables, and it looks like Copilot actually knows what we want. Local raw video path. Let me add the $sign. So this is a variable. This is the folder, the raw video folder, and then this is the raw video name. We have a slash in between them, so probably when we supply this variable, we are not going to have a preceding slash in that name. This is just going to be the file name. There's not going to be any prefix slash. This probably stays the same. We're just going to convert it to 360p. Not a big deal. I might as well do the output path because that's going to be pretty similar to this. I'm going to copy and paste that and like this. So local raw video path. No, we probably want the local processed video path. Yep, name is correct. And the file name is not going to be this. It's going to be the processed video name. And so I'm just going to copy and paste that. Cool. Now we don't have access to the response, so we can't actually complete the response from within this function. And that's probably not what we would want to do anyway. So I'm going to replace this with just a console.log so that we do have some visibility when we deploy this code into what exactly is going on. And I'm going to replace, well, we already have that error message here. So I'm going to remove this. Now, it might not be immediately obvious to you right now, but if we were to call convert video from our index file here, we would want to know when does that process video complete? Like when does it either finish successfully or when does it throw an error? And after that occurs, we want to execute some piece of code here. This function right now is not returning anything, so we can't do that. We have no visibility into what happened within this function from the outside world. So to solve that problem, we're actually going to wrap this entire thing into a JavaScript promise. So we're going to say, yep, Copilot already knows, return promise and resolve reject. These, if you've never written a promise before, this basically is going to allow us at runtime to either resolve or reject the promise, which will either throw an error or return a value. I'm going to now cut and paste this into here. And when we are successfully done processing the video, we can then resolve the promise. So after that occurs, I'm going to call resolve here. And I think I'm forgetting a semicolon right there, but it's probably not super important. And we're getting an error here. And the reason is because I think implicitly a promise is expected to resolve with a value, but we don't necessarily have to resolve with a value. So I'm just going to say that this is a promise of void type. So that kind of resolves that, and no pun intended. Here, if we have an error, we want to reject the promise. We want the outside world to know that there was an error that occurred and this happened to be the error. There might not be much we can do with that, but at least we know that an error occurred. Now we're pretty much done with this function and we can kind of move on to the actual file system operations, especially with GCS. So scrolling down, I have declared two more functions. One is going to download a raw video from the raw video bucket, and that's not even going to be a parameter because that's always going to be the same. We know all the raw videos are always going to be within that bucket, so we don't even have to supply that parameter. So this is going to be a very simple API to use. All we have to say is what's the file name, and then we can download it. And similarly, over here, we're going to upload videos given a file name, like a local file name, from the local processed video folder, and we're going to upload it to the processed video bucket because we already know the processed videos locally are going to be here, and after they are uploaded, they're going to be here. We don't need to add parameters for that. so that we can kind of keep these interfaces very, very simple for us to use within our index.ts. At least that's how I like to approach it. Of course, you might have your own preferences if you wanted to make this super extensible. If we were going to be maybe reusing these functions throughout our code, we would want to maybe make them more extensible. But in our case, we don't really need to do that. We already declared our storage instance variable up above, and this is going to allow us to upload videos, but we have to specify the bucket. So Copilot knows what we're doing because we named our variables pretty well. So raw video bucket name, and which file are we going to download? Well, it's given to us as a parameter. That's the easy part. And of course, we have to specify that we're going to download it. It's kind of interesting to me that we have to specify the bucket and the file first, but oh well. So after that, we specify the action, which is downloading in this case, and which is like the destination folder that we want to put them in. Again, since we had our variable names pretty well, Copilot knows what we're doing. And after that, perhaps we can add some logging as well. Now, I believe that this is already an asynchronous function. Yeah, when you hover over it, you can see that this is returning a promise. So we probably want to execute this log statement after this has actually completed. So we're going to put an await here. Basically, that will block any code after this line in the same function. It will block any of this from running until this is actually completed. And that's also the reason why we had to declare this function asynchronous, because if I get rid of that, I'm pretty sure we're not allowed to use the await keyword. So you have to mark this explicitly as asynchronous. And you might be wondering, well, what's the return type of this function? This is also returning a promise now. Because it's asynchronous, it has to return a promise. So outside of this function, if we were to call download raw video, as you're going to see in just a second, we are going to call it with the await keyword in front of it because we want to wait until that promise has resolved. Continuing, let's put some logging here. And in this case, Copilot does know exactly what we're doing. And that's because Google Cloud Storage buckets always are prefixed with this path, Google Storage, or at least that's what I assume it stands for. And this is going to be the bucket name as we have up above. This is the file name. That's the file that we downloaded, and we put it into the local raw video folder. Cool. And we're going to do something very, very similar for uploading processed videos. But in this case, I'm actually going to declare a variable for the bucket because we're actually going to be needing this 2 times, as you're going to see in a second. So this is the processed video bucket name. And 1, we're going to upload a video to that bucket. So bucket.upload, and all we have to give is the actual file name, which in this case is going to be from our local processed video folder. So I'll tab complete that. After that, we also can specify what is the file name that we want after it has been stored. And in our case, it's going to be the exact same. Like, we don't really care too much. We're probably going to generate that file name client side to make sure it's unique, or rather server side, but we'll get into that in a bit. 1, we're uploading the file, and we're also going to add an await in front of that as well, because after it's done completing, we're going to add some logging. But what's even more important than that is that we want to set that file to be public. And the reason is, by default, it's not going to be public, but we want it to be public because every video that's been processed ultimately is going to be viewed by users within YouTube. And the easiest way to do that is by making them public. Of course, YouTube has other features that support like private video uploads as well, but we're going to be ignoring that functionality for now. And I guess here, let's go ahead and add some logging as well. So console.log. I'm just going to copy and paste it because you might not be super interested in seeing me type this all out. Basically, the local video has been uploaded to the GCS bucket. Remember that we also want to do a bit of cleaning up after we've actually uploaded videos. We don't want to have a bunch of raw and processed videos in our file system. We don't really need that. So given a file path, a local file path, we're going to delete files. And this is an asynchronous operation. So again, we're going to kind of wrap it in a promise so that we can add like an await in front of it. And this is where our file system library comes in that we imported. So what I'm going to say is, first, let's make sure that that file actually exists, because if it doesn't exist, as Copilot is suggesting to us, then we definitely can't delete it. We'll probably get an error, I think. So in that case, we want to reject the promise, and we'll just give a message saying that the file doesn't exist. And actually, I'm going to do this the opposite way. First, I'm going to check if the file actually does exist. In the else case, I'm going to assume that it doesn't. And in that case, I'm going to put a console.log, and I'm going to say that the file is not found at this path that was specified to us. So we're going to skip the delete. And here, it's kind of personal preference. You might want to reject if we skipped it, but I don't think that's necessarily worth rejecting over. We can just resolve and the log should be enough, at least in our case. So that's how I'm going to do it, but I think this is a bit debatable. This might be questionable. We might want to like put a reject here so that we actually know from outside this function that whether we actually succeeded or didn't. But up here, I'm going to get rid of that. So this is the case where we actually do the deletion. Now that can be done with fs filesystem.unlink the file. This is, I believe, the fastest way to delete a file. It's kind of just marking the file as deleted, I think, without actually updating the disk space, but that's a minor detail. So here, let's pass in a callback that if this was successful, this error should be undefined. So if the error is defined, that means our unlink was unsuccessful. So then we can say console.log failed to delete file at this given path. And perhaps in another console.log, we can actually print the error message as well. So I'll just stringify the error, or actually that's probably worth just putting in a second parameter there. So we'll print the error at the same time as that message. Now, at that point, we'll also reject the promise and reject it with that error. In the else case, we will just go ahead and resolve it. Probably before that, we can add some logging like this, file deleted at the given path. So notice how I'm actually not exporting this function. That's because we don't need to. We're going to keep things even more simple for us and just create two hard-coded functions that will delete either a raw video or delete a process video like below. And you can see these functions are dead simple. We're just given the file name. We don't even have to worry about the folder that it's in because we know every raw video is going to be in that folder. So this function is going to delete videos from that folder, and this function is going to delete videos from this folder. And both of these are going to be exported so that we can use them in our index.ts. Now, I'm also going to create one more non-exported function, which just ensures that a directory exists. And you're going to see why I'm creating this in a second. But given some directory path, we just check with our file system, does this folder exist? If it doesn't, we create that folder. So we basically guarantee that this directory does exist after this has been called. Either we create it or it was already existing. And the reason for this function is because we're going to go all the way back up at the top. We're going to fill out this setup directories function by ensuring that these two local directories always exist at the time that our container is started up, because we know we're always saving files to these two folders. What happens if these folders don't even exist? Well, we can guarantee that they exist with this function. So the first thing I'm going to do when we head back to index.ts is probably import that function. I think, what was it called? I already forgot. Setup directories. Cool. And then here, before I guess we even create our express, I'm going to go ahead and call that setup directories. And we don't even have to pass any parameters because that's all abstracted for us. So we don't have to know the implementation details like these variables or anything like that. So now I'm going to go back to the process video endpoint, and I'm going to get rid of all of this code and actually replace it with some more code. Here, I'm just copy and pasting, but I'll go ahead and explain every single line. This endpoint is actually not going to be invoked by any user. It's not even going to be invoked by us manually. It's going to be invoked by a Cloud PubSub message. I won't go into depth right now, but that's basically like a message queue. And every time a file is uploaded to the raw video bucket, this endpoint will be notified via that Cloud PubSub message queue. And this is kind of the standard way that you would take a message from Cloud PubSub and parse it to get the data. We are going to ensure that the name attribute exists on the data because that's going to tell us the file name. If it doesn't, we're going to throw an error, which is going to be caught down here. And then we're going to just return with a 400 code. It was a client error. And if you're wondering, how the hell did I come up with this code? Like, you probably wouldn't just guess this out of nowhere. Like, how do you know it's base 64 encoded? How do you know all of this stuff? Well, it's okay. When in doubt, you can refer to the documentation. And thankfully, there is a bit of documentation on this. I think if you scroll all the way down to this section, looking at the code, and you make sure you have Node.js selected, there is some sample code. That's pretty much where I got this from. I think it is this part specifically. I mean, we wrote it in a slightly different way, but we ensure that we have like these attributes. And here you can see this is where I'm getting the buffer base64 encoding and all that. So yeah, I'm not like making this up out of nowhere, just so we're clear on that. Now, filling out the rest of this should actually be the easy part because we already defined like the bulk of our function. So the first thing I'm going to do is just define the file names. Like the data.name, like I said, is the input file name. It's the file that we're going to download from the raw videos bucket. And after we're done processing the video, this is what we're going to call it. Pretty much the exact same, just prefixed with the processed string. So now for actually downloading the video, download the raw video from cloud storage. We can do that with, like Copilot is suggesting, but I'm going to get rid of that so we can get the auto import. Yep. This is going to auto import from the storage file that we just declared. And here, what's the file name? Well, we have it declared up above. We're trying to make things really simple for us. What is it called? The input file name there. And we want this to be blocking. We want to wait until this file has actually been downloaded, and then we're going to do some conversion down here, but we're getting an error. Why do you think that might be? Because this function has not yet been marked asynchronous, and since this is an anonymous function, we have to put that async keyword over here. So there we go with that. Now, after the fact, we're going to also upload the video. I'm kind of skipping a step here just to do the easy part first. Upload the processed video to cloud storage, and again, we have a function defined exactly for that upload process video with the output file name. And when we run that, we're also going to wait on that. But in between, we actually have to do some processing, right? So I'll tab complete the comment, and here, let's actually wrap this stuff in a try catch because we know it's possible that the processing could actually fail. So here, before I call convert video, it's going to be in a try. So if there's an error, we can kind of handle it here. There's not much we would really be able to do if there's an error, but at that point, if there is an error, we probably don't want to add this step. So at the very least from here, we could probably just return, and we'll probably return a 500 status code. And the string, yeah, this string looks mostly correct to me, so we can leave it as is. And then up here, let's actually try converting the video. So passing in the input file name as well as the output file name. And here, we're also going to call await because of course we want to finish converting before we actually try to upload the video. Now, this could actually catch an error, so let's a bit more explicit here and go ahead and like console log that error for us as well. We don't necessarily need to expose it to the client, but maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing to do that, but I won't do that for now. Now, I will say we probably want to clean up even if the conversion failed, because at the very least, we have a raw video locally that we need to clean up. And it's possible that we actually converted part of the video and ended up creating a processed video file, even if maybe the file was corrupt or something like that. So we actually want to call delete raw video with the input file name and delete processed video with the output file name. We want to call both of these. Now, these are both asynchronous as well, and we probably want to call these before we actually end this function call. So we can kind of call await on each of these, but it's a tiny bit more efficient if we await them in parallel, and JavaScript does have functionality to do that. It's called the promise.all method, and it accepts an array of promises. In our case, it's going to be these two that I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste, add a comma here, get rid of this semicolon, and tab there. And this is also asynchronous, so we can actually call await here instead. So we're kind of awaiting these two in parallel, or at the very least concurrently. There is going to be a tiny bit of duplicate code because we want to delete the videos if there was an error, but we also want to delete the videos if we were successful and we actually uploaded the processed video to cloud storage. So here, I'm going to copy and paste that same code. Maybe there's a cleaner way to write this, but I don't think this is super repetitive, so I'm happy with this code. Perhaps you can think of a better way. Now, after that's done, we can probably return a 200 status code because we were actually successful. And the string I'm going to write actually is going to be processing finished successfully. So that is the entire function. Of course, the code will be below so you can see it all a bit more easily. And we can probably also get rid of this import statement as well. Next, we're going to look at how we can actually deploy this code now to Cloud Run.